Please come up on stage, sir. Joining him on the panel will be author and former Indian diplomat, Pavan K. Varma, who is also a senior politician with the JDU. And to moderate this discussion, we have Abhishek Kapoor, executive editor, Republic TV.
A very good morning to you all. Am I audible? We start or kickstart the second day of our summit with this nice panel. My two guests, both in many ways men of many hats. Formally they are ambassadors, but Ambassador Malka has been with the Israeli Defense Forces for a long period. Then he was heading the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, am I right, Ambassador Malka? And Ambassador Pavan Varma, of course, is a known name and face in Delhi, on Indian television, in the field of Indian diplomacy, and of course, arts and culture. Have I introduced you right, Ambassador Varma? Of course, politics. How can I forget that? But since this conversation today we are going to have on a subject which is much broader, I believe the experiences of both my guests in all the fields they have been are relevant and kosher. When I say peace or when we say peace is kosher, I believe the subject was decided by our editor Niranjan Narayan Swami. Something comes to my mind. A very famous personality some time back had said that poverty is a state of mind. Just to paraphrase it, is peace a state of mind? And when we say peace is kosher, are we kind of limiting it in some ways, or are we actually trying to put an ethical construct to it, Ambassador Varma? So I'll begin with Ambassador Malka. Israel is a nation that has, since its inception, yearned and, striven for peace in ways that perhaps no other nation has in recent history. How do you understand, Ambassador Malka, when we say peace is kosher and we should look at peace from that ethical construct?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me here. Peace is something that we should all seek for always. And Israel, since its creation, is seeking for peace and willing to give and sacrifice a lot for peace. I don't know if many of the audience here know, but 40 years ago when we signed the peace contract with Egypt, Israel gave territories that are bigger than what Israel is now. So it was more than 50% of the territories that Israel had at that time, just for peace. Once we realized that there's, on the other side of the table, a partner that is serious and really going for a real, long-lasting, genuine peace, we showed that we are willing to do a lot and to sacrifice a lot for peace. I think the world should seek for peace. It's something that we should seek for it always. Because now, in this modern era, violence is not acceptable. We can solve many issues, many tensions, many misunderstandings in peaceful ways. And this is something that we should seek for.
I'll come to that long journey of yearning for peace that Israel has had. But Ambassador Varma, when I talk of ethical construct, we are marking the 150th year of Mahatma Gandhi's birth. You think India provides that ethical construct? And if yes, have we done enough to really push it in the world?
No, I think India as a civilization has valorized the importance of peace more than many other countries, starting from Ashoka after the Kalinga War, when he said that the violence has repelled him and he would rather choose peace as a policy instrument. And Gandhiji used ahimsa, or the absence of violence, and the dynamic use of the possibility of peace to defeat the greatest empire in the world. But having said that, while peace has its own dividends, especially in terms of development, in terms of economics, in terms of equilibrium and harmony and goodwill, an unjust peace is tantamount to violence.
Exactly.
Because whenever there is an inequitable basis to peace, when it's a frozen peace which goes against what should be your just dividends from any agreement or pact or arrangement, then to accept such a peace is, in my view, wrong. And Chanakya, the great strategician, Ambassador Malka, at least 1500 years before Machiavelli, the first Machiavelli, or rather Machiavelli was the second Chanakya, he said that while peace is the first option and is kosher, but peace must be on terms of equality, in terms of equity, and in terms of justice.
So you put two nuances to it. A, that absence of violence is peace. Is that enough? B, you said just peace. Ambassador Malka, from your experience and your experience as a nation, these two qualifications for peace, like A, that it's just absence of violence, and then B, just peace. How do you reconcile these two things?
Well, of course, peace, first and foremost, is
and if you can give some examples from your neighborhood.
Of course, it's non-violence. In order to reach peace and solve issues in a non-violent way, we can do many, many things. I can tell you from my experience that 35 years ago, as a young officer in the Israeli military, they brought to us a geopolitical expert, very wise man. And he told us, young officers, get prepared. There's going to be a war in the Middle East. It's going to be soon. It's going to be about water, because we suffered then from scarcity of water. And the population was growing very fast in the Middle East. So we knew that water, which is an essential part for life, whereas a scarcity of water will lead, that's what he thought, will lead to war. There has never been a war in the Middle East about water. There will never be a war in the Middle East about water. Because since then, we developed so many techniques and technology to manage water, to overcome the water challenge. Now Israel, which is mostly desert, has abundance of water and even supply water to its neighbors, even as a part of our peace agreement with Jordan.
That's very interesting. So you're suggesting that while the world believes that Israel is in a very difficult neighborhood and that almost everyone is, so to say, at the throat of Israel, you are actually suggesting that with some technology, aid of technology and innovation, you are actually bought peace, so to say, in that very difficult neighborhood.
Exactly. As you mentioned, I have a military background. I served 25 years in the Israeli military, but then 13 years in the financial markets as an economist. So if I bring those two together, I can tell you that if we'll focus, and I think this is the vision that Israel and India share, if we'll focus more on innovation, on technology, we can ease many, many tensions and even diffuse tensions, which will bring peace closer and closer. So the world should focus and invest as an investment, more in technology, which will bring prosperity and which provide people their needs. And when people have their basic needs at least, they will go and seek for peace.
Right.
This is the idea.
I come back to you for greater detail on this, on Israel's contribution on water and agriculture, for example. But Ambassador Varma, I mean, it's a very interesting point he made that Israel innovated, and in a difficult neighborhood, the relationship became better and peace has prevailed with some neighbors at least because they shared water. I mean, there is a context because many states have problems in India. You think that that is one element where innovation can also lead to peace?
Well, I think that every instrument that can promote the cause of peace should be explored fully. Innovation is one of the instruments. Technology is another. The whole range of instruments available under diplomacy, their end purpose must be for a mutually beneficial and constructive peace.
Right.
But that need not happen. And therefore, personally, I am against the tendency to romanticize peace at any cost.
That's a very interesting point you made.
If, for instance, let me contextualize what I'm saying, Ambassador.
Right.
In our context, we have a neighbor.
Yes.
In the form of Pakistan.
Yes.
There is much that is common between us. People-to-people contacts are often good. Part of the cultures overlap. We speak very often in the same language, eat the same food, enjoy the same music and dance, etc. So there are peace dividends for both countries. But so long as Pakistan continues to use terror as a proxy instrument against us, it is difficult to support the peaceniks who gather at the border and say, irrespective of this violation, we must have peace at any cost.
Very valid point you brought in, Ambassador Varma. See, you said there is no point romanticizing peace. I mean, Israel never romanticizes peace, Ambassador Malka. But we are sitting today, it's 27/11. Yesterday was 26/11, and there is some incident, terror attack of Mumbai that connects Israel and India with 26/11. Ambassador Varma says that there is no point romanticizing peace, and despite whatever commonality we have, for example, with Pakistan, it has not helped. I would just want to understand, post 26/11, how far we have come together, India and Israel, in terms of sharing, cooperation on this issue, and are we wiser in terms of dealing with this issue of terror?
Thank you. Well, the horrific terrorist attack of 26/11 shows that Israel and India share not only values and history, ethics and rituals, but also similar threats. And terrorism, and I really agree with Ambassador Pavan, is something that we should eliminate. This is not a way of solving issues, differences, or whatever it is. Terrorism is something that we should eliminate. Now we understand, and the world is starting to internalize, that terrorism is a global disease because it can, emerge in different places. Just lately, we saw that terrorism emerged in New Zealand and Sri Lanka, and of course, on Europe. So the world should understand that terrorism is something that we should eliminate. This is not the way that we should solve any issue. So if the world will get united, and that's what India and Israel are doing, sharing technology, know-how, knowledge, because as I said, we share similar threats. If the world will get united and will cooperate, the world will eliminate terror. We can win terror. It's in our hands, but the world should be united. And of course, we should not allow any state supporting terror. This is something that is not acceptable. It's not acceptable.
I'll come to that. Ambassador Varma, you've been at India's permanent mission at the UN. I want to understand. The world has been discussing terror, global terror, discussing a global convention on terror since at least early 1990s. Why is it that despite having so much suffering, so much understanding about what ails this, how to deal with this issue, why can't the United Nations, for example, decide on a common definition of terrorism and sign this global convention on terror?
Frankly, Abhishek, if you allow me to speak my mind.
Yes.
I'm against these umbrella multilateral agreements on issues which are self-evident.
What do you mean? I'm like, should we not defining terror?
I'll tell you. I have been part of our permanent mission to the UN and negotiated agreements and texts for days at end. And once they are agreed upon, nobody reads them. I want to say to you, terrorism is much too important to be held hostage to international diplomats working out a definition in New York.
Then who would?
I suggest countries who are the victims of terrorism must get together and come out with the right level of punch in dealing with terror. Let's not waste time. We face the brunt of terrorism. I would much rather that we prepare our armed forces to be able to repel it, to thwart it, to short-circuit it, with countries that stand with India, rather than investing my energies in the drafting of a global convention which is negotiated for the last number of years.
3 decades now.
With countries not agreeing even on the definition of terrorism. What do I gain?
Are you
Israel is a country that has on its own resolve fought against terror.
Are you suggesting that that global convention on terror is dead?
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying let us not give it the importance that we currently seem to occasionally give. Let that be negotiated. Let diplomats do their job. But there's no magic wand if you come up tomorrow with an internationally agreed convention on terrorism, including its definition. You will still have terrorists coming across the border.
No, that's a very a nice understanding, I believe, that is coming out between the two of you. Like you have been in the Israeli Defense Forces. You think that you don't need conventions, you actually need to act and strengthen your forces, like from Israel's experience?
I would suggest that we can try to have them both. It's not one against another. So it's not, and I agree with Ambassador Pavan, we are not waiting for any consent there in the international arena. We are doing what is necessary. We are not waiting for anyone. And fighting terror is not a passive way. It can be active, proactive, preventive, preemptive. All the ways are legitimate in order to fight terror, which is not legitimate in any way. So we are not waiting for anyone. We'll do and we'll take, and Israeli think proved that we'll take all the necessary measures and actions that are needed to fight terror, to eliminate terror. But then, again, in parallel to that, in addition to that, we are trying to get the consent in the world because Ambassador Pavan said that countries that suffer from terror. We now understand that more and more countries will suffer from terror. And we should expand it to the world, that it's not legitimate. Even those countries that don't suffer now from terror might suffer. Who expected to see terror, such an horrific terror attack in New Zealand? So it might happen to many other countries. They should understand that. And of course, we should work on that, but not wait for anything. We'll do, and we take all the measures and the actions that are needed to protect our civilians, our citizens, of course, our beloved country.
Ambassador Varma, now it seems that some common understanding that comes out of this conversation that victim nations or victim societies should come together rather than, a United Nation kind of agency.
In practical terms.
In practical terms, yes. And you strengthen your forces and tackle terror as it happens and prevent terror from happening as the lessons, I hope, which have been taken post 26/11. Ambassador Varma, you are also an author. In many ways, when I read your books, a sociologist actually, from the 1998 book of The Great Indian Middle Class to Being Indian to Becoming Indian. Though, of course, I thought that the order was in reverse. If you're already being Indian, why write Becoming Indian after that? But what I want to understand is, in the context of the conversation we are having, does a society present a context in which peace or terror builds? What I'm directly suggesting is that this issue of radicalization, is it something that has to be tackled at the societal plane, and how, nations, for example, can collaborate on that?
No, if you're talking about how society reacts to either peace or radicalization, I have a very strong opinion on that. And my opinion is that most Indians or most people in any country want to get on with their lives. They want an atmosphere of peace where they have a job, they have safety, they have security, their children go to school, the future looks bright, they invest in it, there is stability, there is equilibrium, and there is security.
But some
That's what
societies
people
don't.
want.
But some societies don't.
Yeah, now, if they don't, most people, incidentally, even where radicalization is concerned, in my view, about Indians, irrespective of caste or creed, most people want to swim away from the islands of religious exclusivism, from the clutches of mullahs and mahants, to the dividends of the secular mainstream, to get on with their lives, I feel. So therefore, societies don't necessarily valorize violence, but societies support systemic, planned, ideologically well-grounded resort to violence, as for instance, Ambassador, happened when we did the airstrike in Balakot. Because appeasement of an unjust peace is tantamount to violence.
Right.
And so when we crossed the line and we showed that we cannot be taken for granted and that we will attack, I believe it had societal approval.
Right. I understand. So one thing that comes out of his contextualizing what I said was that if it's an aspirational society, if it's looking for good things of life, then there is more peace dividend. You think with Israel's innovation, technology in water, agriculture, if that becomes the societal leitmotif, so to say, that you would rather prefer peace dividend that comes from innovation and aspiration, what kind of model does Israel provide in the context of, let's say, Israel-India relationship?
Well, first I'll start with how we see it, how we can get dividends for peace, for innovation and prosperity, which is, like Ambassador Varma said, when people are satisfied, it's natural. It's natural to live in peace ways. Radicalism and, of course, terrorism and violence usually are emerging from scarcity. So if we can provide more to people, to societies, they will tend to live in peace and to solve differences in peaceful ways. We can also see that those economies that invested and focused in innovations are those that performed well and are those that have less political tensions. If we can provide to people and satisfy at least their basic needs, they will tend to live in peace and to solve peace and peaceful issues. As far as the relations between Israel and India, since we share the same vision, both Israel and India are focusing in innovation, in technology, in peaceful ways to solve differences and conflicts. Both Israel and India's democracies cherish human rights and, of course, the individual rights, and with the rule of law. Focusing on innovation and technology will ease the tension and will lead and will help and facilitate peace processes.
I would want to bring the session to close, but Major Gaurav Arya had a question actually. So he wanted me to, get him involved with this one very interesting question he has with his background in the forces as well. Major Arya, yeah, you had a question for Ambassador Malka, I believe. Yes.
Sir, before I ask my question, I'd just like to tell you that in the army there is an exam called Part B in the Indian Army, and we wrote about General Moshe Dayan. So our relationship with Israel goes a long way back, 25 years at least. Mine personally. Sir, my question is that Israel has compulsory conscription in the army, and people serve, youngsters serve in the armed forces. As far as India is concerned, how do you see India replicating? Can India replicate it? Do you think it's a good idea for India to replicate this?
Essentially, should it be mandatory to join services for a while?
question is well answered. So thank you for the question. Well, I can tell you that we, Israel, got many, many dividends for this mandatory service that we have in Israel. It's much, much more than contributing to the country 3 years, which is mandatory. This is the length of the mandatory service in Israel. It's much more than that. Because the military in Israel is also a melting pot. It's the biggest educator. And we built our country on education. And it's even the biggest incubator of technology, of innovative technology, groundbreaking technology. So given all that, Israel gained many, many dividends for this mandatory service. I can tell you about myself, which is, I think, a shining example for that, because I joined the military for 3 years. That's what I planned. My passion was to go to the academia. But then I stayed 25 years, and I did my first, second, and PhD in economics during my service in the military. Because military is not just, providing security on the borders. It's much, much more than that. So people get together, they are engaged, they feel belongingness to their nation, to their country, they contribute and they get. So it's much, much more, holistic than just joining the military and contributing in giving security in the borders. Thank you.
No, there is a very interesting corollary to this mandatory conscription in Israel. Ambassador Varma, you know the phenomenon of young Israelis coming to Dharamshala. Have you kind of studied it in any manner?
No, I think there is some cultural, psychological affinity between our two countries, Ambassador. When many years ago I was High Commissioner in Cyprus, not far from Israel, my immediate neighbor was the ambassador of Israel to Cyprus. And he had two sons who, after finishing school and before joining university, had both gone to India. And so we became more than neighbors because of his children. And it's something that is difficult to explain why so many of people from Israel, the young, come to India. But I think it strengthens the relationship between the two countries. Because the memories they carry back at a very, very, it's a transformative age when they are here. Young people.
Ambassador Malka, you were here as a youngster. You were here as a youngster. You would have some memories.
Yes, of course. I visited India 25 years ago. I was as a young officer in the military, but then I had to wait 2 years to get this vacation of 3 weeks. So I came to see India. So, Ambassador, you also should ask,
did you visit Dharamshala?
What is this attraction that makes so many Israelis, and of course India is by far the most touristic country for Israelis, and especially youngers, in the age that they absorb really the culture, of course, and what India has. And India has a lot to give also to the world, but to these youngsters that are coming here, not only just to tour around and to see sights, but to absorb the culture, of course, the wisdom of the Indian people. And they are coming with a lot of things enriched. That's what I feel. They are coming enriched back to Israel.
Right. Thank you so much.
That link is kosher. Because
that is absolutely
kosher. It leads to peace.
Kosher link, yes, of course.
That is absolutely kosher. I would end on this note. In fact, I come from Baroda, which is my hometown in Gujarat, and it has an organization called Friends of Israel. And because of that organization, almost every neighborhood in Baroda has a boy or a girl who has had a kibbutz experience. I wanted to have it. Maybe I'll soon have, whenever boss allows me to have some days off. With this, I believe we bring this discussion to an end. I give it back to Rini.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you very much, ambassadors. Please take your seats in the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our next segment, and we'd like to